gather up here if you could. Is that everybody? All right, so welcome to St. Louis number 1. So I'm Casey. So just a few quick guidelines. First of all, just keep in mind, if you could while you're here, that everything is very old and fragile. So try not to touch the tombs, don't like lean against them or anything like that. Also, so you're welcome to take any kind of like photographs if you'd like while you're here. Just do me a favor though, just try to stay within eyesight. Just because turns out it's pretty easy to get lost in the cemetery. And so about like a month ago, I had somebody get lost for about like 10 minutes. So, you know, prefer not down with it. Also, closer everybody follows me, the more time I'm going to have to tell you everything. All right, so this is St. Louis number 1. So the cemetery was founded originally in 1789, one of the oldest still operating cemeteries in the country today. So the first thing that people usually notice, though, about a New Orleans cemetery, when they see one for the first time at least, is that everything here is above the ground. So we did actually once have a below ground cemetery in New Orleans that existed before they built St. Louis number 1. So that used to be known as St. Peter's Cemetery, below sea level. And so back in the day, if anybody tried to dig 6 feet under the ground, anywhere outside the French Quarter, as likely as not, they might hit water. So they pretty quickly realized when they started to build St. Louis up here that this was going to have to be an above ground cemetery. So another thing about above ground graveyards, though, at least the way we use them in this city, an above ground graveyard in New Orleans is actually a lot more efficient in many ways than a below ground cemetery could ever be. And that's kind of why we can also just kind of put them where we want them. That's why they're still kind of part of the life of the city right now, you might say. So right now, for instance, St. Louis number 1. So it did used to be a lot larger when it was first built. So for one thing, it used to stress the other side of Basin Street across the way, basically where that church steeple is, if you can see that. You might have actually noticed when you came inside, there's a small pyramid over there at the entrance. So that's known as the Varney tomb. It's the grave of 2 children, actually. But when the Varney tomb was first built, it used to mark the very center of the cemetery. So right now, today St. Louis is only 1 city block going either direction. So even right now, though, within just 1 city block today, some people estimate that there might be as many as 10,000 people placed inside of here right now. Some people actually go as high as perhaps over 20,000, and they're still putting people in here. This is still an active cemetery. Usually there's a funeral about like once a month or so nowadays, depending on how the year is going. There's one last weekend, actually. So the way that we managed to do that, how we managed to fit that many people in here, how we continue to fit people in here, the whole thing works around what you might call a circulation system. So your typical crypt tomb, like this one here next to me, these are almost always owned by families, the crypt tombs. They're held throughout the generations. And so this is, I'm going to say, a relatively average looking tomb. Interesting exterior, but at least size-wise, it's pretty typical. And so I haven't seen inside this one, but I'm guessing most likely there's probably 2 chambers inside. So one at the top and one at the bottom, almost always. That's how they get set up. And so the way things work is, say one year your grandmother passes away, so she can go inside the top. Maybe your family, though, maybe you end up having a bad year. So maybe say that year you also lose a cousin or an uncle eventually. So that's why you have at least one extra vault in your tomb usually, just in case. So they can go on the bottom. And then, of course, though, you'd at least hope that it's not usual for your family to lose more than 2 people in a year. You'd hope that's not an average year. So I'm sure this family, when they built the tomb, I'm sure they were hoping this would be all the space that was ever needed. But say like 10 years later, somebody else in your family passes away. So then what they do is they come back to your family tomb again. The stone in the front here that has names carved into it, this is known as the tableau. Basically, it's just like a tombstone. But it's designed so that you can unscrew it. For this one on the side, some others on the top. And then you can take it out pretty easily without damaging it. So they take out the tableau. They then walk up to the top chamber, though, where they had placed your grandmother originally. They knock down whatever kind of brick or plaster that they'd used to seal the chamber with. A sexton then goes inside, though, to the top chamber, and very carefully, he scrapes up what remains of grandmother. he places those remains traditionally into a small burlap sack. He then takes that burlap sack to the back of the tomb, to a space in the back that is known as the Laveau. Basically, it's just a tall stone chamber. And so usually they use a long pole, about 10 feet long, with a brush on the end to do this. But he places the bag gently to the bottom of the Laveau. He then steps back, they seal the tomb again, they put back in the tableau. And so basically, their job is done for that day, the cemetery workers. So that bag is made of burlap, though. So not necessarily going to hold together for very long. And so then the process that starts to happen, usually pretty quickly, once you've been placed into one of the back of one of these tombs, is what's usually known around the city as a family reunion. So everyone gets back together again, and they all shake hands, if you will. And as you might imagine, that's being an incredibly efficient way of dealing with the dead here in the city. One of these crypt tombs like this could easily hold at least about 100 or so people inside if they wanted, if not more than that, if they wanted to try. So the official waiting period before they're allowed to take somebody from the front and move them into the back is a year and a day. So that was actually said originally by the Catholic Church when they first opened in St. Louis. A year is considered to be the proper period of mourning, according to Catholic doctrine. So depending on when they place someone inside one of these tombs, though, particularly what time of year that they put you inside, they could probably move you out of the front of the tomb a lot earlier than that, usually, if they really wanted to. So one of these tombs during the summertime gets an average around 150 to 200 degrees on the inside. It's also about 100% humidity. So the whole thing is basically like a long natural cremation in many ways. You put someone inside one of these tombs, and especially once summer comes around very quickly, everything is starting to fall off the bone and cook away. So unless you probably find left with someone that you put in here for, say, a couple months in July and August, for that matter, September, probably just some very small pieces of bone and a lot of ash, basically, a lot of dust. So any questions? I know a lot of questionable practices. No questions? Yep.
If that's like actively going on, is there a smell associated?
That's a very common question. No, it never really smells. So they're sealed, so they're not exactly airtight, but anything coming out is coming out very slowly, so that's not really an issue. Maybe back in the day, if there were like an epidemic, when there were like 100 people here, there might be an issue, but that's not really now. Any other questions?
So the front comes up and then they just kind of cover it, like do a plaster
Well,
once it goes
there's
in?
brick behind the tableau, so that has to get knocked down every time. So, a lot of debate around the city about why Nicolas Cage wants a tomb in St. Louis, number one. You know, he's not really from New Orleans or anything like that. He's also not dead yet, so it is an empty tomb inside right now, as far as we know. Some locals say that maybe his movie career might have been placed inside the tomb, which is a joke. So probably the best explanation, though, that I've heard over the years for why he got the tomb built. So he built it 14 years ago in 2010. The year before that, in 2009, is actually when Nicolas Cage went into bankruptcy. Apparently, he had just made a mess of his finances. And so he ended up owing a lot of money to a lot of people at that time, including, though, the IRS, the American Tax Collection Agency. And so, for one thing, that's why a lot of people think maybe that's the reason that he's been starring in all these, you know, not always the best movies for the past decade or so, just because he's been trying to make that money back, they say, just taking everything that they offered him. But also, though, there happens to be this kind of odd part of the U.S. tax code that apparently it goes back to some 19th century precedent in America. But the last thing that the federal government in this country can take away from someone usually in a bankruptcy, after they've taken everything else they own, is actually a final resting place. And so he spent, they estimate, about like $500,000 getting this tomb built. So a lot of people think that maybe he was just kind of parking some of his money here, saying, well, you know, you can't take that away from me, at least, unlike my Maserati. More exotic theories claim that he might have also stuffed a bunch of money or gold inside the tomb. Take that for what. So, the writing on the outside, it says Omnia ab Uno, which is Latin for all from one. So, no one has any idea what all from one means to Nicolas Cage exactly. Most likely, it doesn't mean anything. Most people think he probably just came up with it off the top of his head. So they used to have to keep a very close eye on this tomb, though, back when people could still just kind of walk near by themselves. Just because another odd thing that started to happen pretty soon after they built it is people would often walk by it, and they'd often end up leaving a kiss mark on the outside, which is very odd, mostly just because Nicolas Cage is not that handsome. And I'm not an expert on that kind of subject, but most people agree with me when I say that, so I think I'm right about that. But I guess, whatever floats your boat, like my grandmother would say, please don't kiss, though. I get it. So follow me this way. Primarily there's spices. Traditionally the families were responsible to maintain their tomb. So nowadays you can buy, you actually have to buy it if you get a new tomb, something that's called perpetual care. So that's like an upfront fee that people pay, and the church pays close attention. Which one? To their tomb. So the ones in bad condition.